Hello, today's video is actually kind of a talking head video. I'm going to go over a little bit about Ottoman clothing in the SCA. I want to caveat that with I am not culturally from that part of the world. This is not a comprehensive history of the Ottoman Empire and garb in the SCA. I've come up with some basic things. I'm just going to go over some key pieces that will help you if you want to create an Ottoman set of garb or you would like to begin your journey on the Ottoman persona bandwagon. My SCA persona is not Ottoman, it's Welsh. I have chosen to dive into the Ottoman garb and a little bit of the history for a combination of two reasons. One, a dear friend of mine has an Ottoman persona. I've discovered that the clothing for the time period is perfect for the summer. I would like to go to summer events and be comfortable. When people say Turkish, they often think they're saying Ottoman. The Ottoman Empire started around 1350, and it started in Anatolia. They didn't become the Ottoman Empire till around 1444, didn't conquer Constantinople, which is the center of the Byzantine Empire, until 1453. If you're saying Ottoman, know what it is and what time period that you're talking about. And if you're saying Turkish, also research that. Many common SCA enthusiasts, myself included, do not read Arabic. Actually, if you kind of think about it, kind of makes sense. We don't read any of the other language that were used in the past, such as Greek or Latin. Most of us in the United States, our primary language is English, maybe Spanish, and not reading, writing, speaking the language of the culture that you're researching can be a hindrance in finding authentic information on what it is you're looking for. To add injury to insult, there's a cultural nuance in the language of peoples around the world. SCA enthusiast is not necessarily going to know all those nuances of whatever culture that they are researching. I'm going to list some names. I will confess that some of them may be incorrect. Could be more of a modern use of the word instead of contextually appropriate to pre-1600, the world the SCA focuses on. If you have corrections and you would like to list them in the comments below, I welcome them. Be polite about it, please. That's a big subject. I'm not going to go into all of that. Understand that the Quran is their holy book. The Quran does not appear to specifically say a woman has to cover her face. She just has to be modest. And men are supposed to cover their hair on their chests. There is much scholarly debate on this subject, but I have found most research supports the verses in the Quran support only that women are to guard their private parts and draw their scarves over their breasts in the presence of men. Veils are not specifically outlined and appear to be regionally, culturally, and societally specific. And there are several references in verses to clothing meant to be beautiful, reverent, and a gift from God that no one can forbid. One of the things when you're creating your Ottoman Empire or your Ottoman clothing, especially if you're a woman, is understanding the history of what you're wearing. I understand that I am not, by any stretch of the imagination, going to go 100% Ottoman. I am an anachronistic SCA player. I want to respect and understand the culture, which is why I'm sharing this research. That's part of the culture that when you research stuff, knowing what it is you're willing to adopt and what you're not willing to adopt in your persona and how that affects your recreation. Being respectful, but also knowing what you're willing to accept and what you're not willing to accept. Compassion and willingness to learn that you will continually be challenged and learning will be necessary. A static persona and cultural representation is not sensitive to the ancient peoples you are representing and honoring. Be willing to learn more. There is a myth about human depictions in art. Yes, there is an enormous amount of stylized art, but there's a large amount of art, even images illustrating Muhammad, though his face is covered. There are vast amounts of people depicted in the SCA time period pre-1600. There are, in fact, so many images that deciphering what culture and strata of society and range in time, it takes focused study and discernment to find the Ottoman images to support your persona and garb foundation. You have to also understand that some of what you're looking at in images is subjective. And then there's also images that were drawn in the 17th century that are very popular, that are going around, that are not actually within the SCA time period. There's a huge debate that they never embroidered anything. There are a few kaftans that are credited with using reverse applique. There's a huge tent that's actually at the Swedish Museum, and it has this magnificent embroidered bead tent. And it has reverse applique, it has applied applique, it has embroidery, it has beadwork, and it is within SCA time period. So I have a really hard time believing that they would put all of those efforts into that tent and not do any of it on their clothing. There is some stitching that shows up on garments or pieces. They have open work, brick stitch, darning with patterns, stem stitch was used, and the chain stitch, but no cross stitch and none of the exquisite woven embroidery techniques that you see in the Elizabethan and Jacobean periods. There is a lot that you can accomplish with the chain stitch, though. Let me tell you, you can layer it, you can weave things in and out of it. It can be a very beautiful embroidery technique. We have a lot of men's kaftans, we have a lot of men's shalwars, we have braided and embroidered and heavily decorated sashes, and those would go over your zibin or over your kaftan. There's a lot of really good research. Men also wore hats with a turban around it, and men's hats were coned often, and they had a turban around the outside. The decorative aigrette looking like thing, the men were right in the middle and they had feathers coming out of it. They wore basically all the same garments as a woman. The biggest difference in men to women's clothing seems to be the turban, the cone hat instead of a pillbox hat, aigrette, which is set on the front instead of the side, and kaftans are bulkier and less fitted. Their hats, so women's hats were very pillbox, so they're very square. The thing you want to stay away from on an Ottoman hat in period is don't do the pointy hat. Don't do the hat that comes way in and is pointed. You really want that pillbox. The big thing is that you want your hat wider at the base than you want it tall. There are some where the hat's a little bit smaller circumference-wise, so it perches a little bit more further back. There's actually another image. It's actually a painting. I don't really know where the painting's from. I'm going to put a picture up for you. And it shows a whole bunch of women in a mosque or in a public gathering, and they're all kneeling down. They're all wearing white veils with their face veils on. Some of them appear, or I don't see any of them that appear to be wearing the black screen, but some of them appear to have like a very light diaphanous veil across their eyes. And every single one of these pillbox hats has to be like this tall and very, very square, very tall and square. Sorguk or aigrette is a decorative plume or holder placed on either side of the tarpus or hat. Men and women both wore them, just positioned differently. The decorative aigrette, and women wore theirs on the side with feathers coming out of it. Kasbasti or headband is a length of embroidered fabric 1 to 2 inches wide. It's tied or attached to the tarpus. Some combinations are by themselves. Others appear to be holding on the veil. Some appear to be wrapped, decorative scarves, but not a turban. One really cool thing that I've found in the pillbox hat images is you have a lot of them where they use this embroidered or braided band. The headbands that they have extant pieces of seem to be heavily embroidered or woven specifically. They're probably tablet woven. Also appear to wear a rolled, it's not a turban, but a rolled decorative piece of fabric around the base of their pillbox hat. There is also this fabulous image, and I'm gonna post it for you. There appears to be something that comes out from behind the hat that dangles down the back that's heavily embroidered and has tassels on it. And I really want to make something like that because I think it would be really cool. I don't know if it is something that ties to the braid that goes down the back or if it is just something separate, but I am very intrigued by the image that I found. It's not very often you find the backside of very many images. The Gomleck that women wore is reported to be very diaphanous, very see-through, very lightweight. Weights of fabrics that are heavily recommended for that are like a cotton voile, which is very see-through and diaphanous. This is a cotton voile. It's really see-through. It's really, really see-through. There do not appear to be very many women or any at all women's Gomleck that are saved in museums. There is a pretty big guess as to how they're constructed just based on the extant pieces of kaftans and zibins that we have. Shalwar or salwar pants are very soft and lightweight, ankle-length pants, wide at the thigh and narrow at the ankle. They could be white or patterned. They could be silk. They can be cotton. Ottoman clothing definitely tapered. You often see many images of how the pants kind of go so low that in images you can see women kind of walking on the back of their pant. That's actually a feature of the pant. The zibin or hurka, sometimes called a shirka, is a very fitted thigh-length underjacket worn over the Gomleck. It may be sleeveless with wide elbow-length sleeves or long wrist-length narrow sleeves, and I have seen them where they are sleeveless. The kaftan, which has been erroneously called the antari, is a sometimes long-sleeved or short-sleeved, knee or ankle length, often has pockets inserted in the hip seam. It is somewhat more fitted for a woman and is tied with a sash. The kaftan is also an A-shape or bell-shaped coat. It has side gores and overlapping front gores. Generally speaking, the neckline is a small, round neckline. It is fastened with buttons or loops. It is often depicted unbuttoned at the neckline. It's often most made of silk or lined in cotton, faced with silk. A Ferace appears to be a variety of different colors. It can be wool, lined, sometimes in fur, sometimes not, worn outside, and you can see in most of these that a face veil of some kind is being worn. I find it intriguing that every single one of them I have found, they have either slits for the possibility of pockets or just to get to their belt pouch underneath. A piece, a P-E-C-E is what I understand that it's spelled. It's worn by pretty much everybody, I guess. If you're a common person, it may not have been something that was worn unless you maybe went to a mosque. What's interesting about the piece or the veil that women wore is there's actually, as far as I know, and I've had several different places show me this, that the Quran does not appear to specifically say a woman has to cover her face. She just has to be modest. So not all women wore face coverings, and it seems that there was a huge variation in that face covering window. Sometimes they wore a small veil, sometimes it was a clear veil. It appears on one of the images that it's a veil that might have a little stiffening and they can flip it up and deal with what they're doing and then flip it down again. And then what goes over your kaftan or over your zibin when you're just wearing that is a sash. And they appear to be embroidered. They appear to be heavily decorated. They are part of the accessory as part of your garment. Earrings, they wore earrings. There's lots of evidence that women wore earrings, rings, bracelets. They didn't wear as many necklaces because if you look at the neckline of this, it would get kind of tangled up. I mean, there is a solution where you could wear really long necklaces and wear them really low, but they didn't usually do that. Slippers are pretty common. I don't have any actual documentation of socks, but I suspect that socks could have been worn. Slippers with a turned up toe were very common. Definitely they wore chopins, things that kept their feet up out of the mud when they went outside. Now, there are a couple really cool images of pouches, and one of the ones that I thought was really interesting was there's a pouch that's kind of like a triangle attached to a length of fabric, and the other end of the fabric is also a triangle, and it looks like it could be very much like what some of the coin purses of the Victorian era, where it looped over your sash and you had a pouch on each side. As far as we know, there were no bras. There is a grouping within the Ottoman garb discussion that they say you can make your zibin tight enough to do breast support if you want to. I struggle with figuring out that fit if you're not doing Persian. Persian has a lot more curve cut into their garb. They also have they want to reveal all the layers of everything that they are wearing. And the Ottomans didn't necessarily do that. You don't see the zibin underneath the kaftan in many of the depictions. And many of the depictions you do see, if they have their coat on over the top of it, you don't see anything. The other thing with clothing, it's all squares and rectangles, but how you put it together, they often used loops around buttons, and they also used heavily braided, they would braid stuff and attach it to the garment, and then that braid would extend all the way over on both sides. The patterns are all very rectangular and square, so your Gomleck is a rectangle, pretty much. You can build in gores into the side, which is what I did. Your Zibin is also very rectangles, very straight triangles and rectangles. Your Salwar are rectangles and triangles all pieced together to make a garment, and yet it still fits. And it's not a sack. It's not like wearing a sack, but it is loose and it is comfortable. If you're recreating Ottoman clothing in the SCA, you want to focus on anything that is pre-1600. So there's a lot of stuff that's gotten jumbled with Western culture mingling with Eastern culture, especially in the last 20 years. Any of the belly dance, tribal style type stuff is really not Ottoman. It's really important to know the difference between Ottoman and Persian. To know as much as you need to know about Ottoman clothing, you have to know about where you're dressing in the Ottoman Empire, because the Ottoman Empire is a vast place.
And there is a lot of history that comes out of the Ottoman Empire, especially in those early 250 years that the SCA personas are focusing on. And prior to that, they were tribal in nature. So there's even more variation, and they were not consolidated tribes. They were individual tribes with individual caliphates, individual rules, and it's a huge topic. Religion is very much a part of the culture. There is a lot of information about the Ottoman Empire through SCA links on Facebook, and also with a huge amount of online bibliography, books, information. They're everywhere. There's a lot of really good information that's starting to really come out in research papers. This is by no means exhaustive, and if I have made any huge mistakes, please let me know. I think it's really important that the SCA open up to cultures around the world and learn about those cultures, become educated and respectful about those cultures, to be able to do that recreation anachronistically, but yet with respect and with education of that culture. Have a beautiful day, and thank you very much for listening to my very brief overview of Ottoman clothing in the SCA time period.